looks good.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to just minimize all of you here. Well, I'm very excited, Tim and everybody, to be here this morning. It sounds like we have a really fun group, and that you guys all have a lot of fun together, and you know each other well. So it's nice to be in an intimate group of supporters and interested people. And Tim's right. Urban Ecology Center has really been involved with our program since the very beginning, and went through some fits and starts with citizen-based monitoring, and the work that we began doing early on, monitoring bats statewide. And I'll sort of be covering today a broad overview of what our program does, but also bat ecology and natural history, and some things that are very specific to Wisconsin bats. And they really are small and mighty nighttime superheroes. So that's sort of our theme for the day. But I have to say, I've been out all week, and in fact, the last several weeks with bats almost every day, but underground, which of course is where they are this time of year. And I think that fits in with your theme of winter wildlife and how they survive. So we'll certainly be talking a lot about hibernation as we go along today. So we'll just start out by covering some basics about bats around the world, but certainly hone in on Wisconsin bat species. And then I want to get into how we actually study those bats, and of course that includes citizen-based monitoring efforts. That's a really critical part of how we keep tabs and keep the pulse on our bat population. And then, of course, we'll talk about white nose syndrome, which is an invasive species story. And we do have good news to share. If you've been paying attention to the news the last couple of years, you may have heard we've had a lot of good glimmers of hope for our Wisconsin bats. And then just touch on ways that you can help, which many of you, I'm sure, are already familiar with. This is a silver-haired bat, by the way, that you're looking at. They blend in really perfectly with tree bark, and we often find them roosting on the bark of trees. So I'm going to sort of move really quickly as I go through this, because I'm hoping we're going to have some good time for questions at the end. So if there's anything that's unclear, just make a note and we can return to that topic as I cover a lot in a short amount of time. This is Bracken Cave. It's the home to the largest group of mammals in the world, and we really like to highlight it when we talk about bats around the world. And talk about the fact that bats, of course, are important, not only because they are insect eaters, but seed dispersers and pollinators, depending on where we go around the globe. Bracken Cave is home to 20 million Mexican free-tailed bats. And this is a species that gives birth to their pups in caves. And of course, at night, the mother bats leave the cave. They spread out across thousands of square miles of Texas landscape. And they literally save Texas farmers billions of dollars in pesticide costs each year, and they are consuming tons of insects each night. So that's this colony's superpower. But one of the other reasons that I like to start with this photograph and this site is that this is a maternity colony. So these mother bats are giving birth to their pup inside the cave. The pup is not able to fly for the first several weeks of its life, so of course it clings to the cave ceiling with millions of other pups. And when mom comes back, she's got a special series of clicks that she uses to talk with just her baby, to help locate her baby, and then she uses her excellent sense of smell to locate her individual pup. And bats are great mothers. But at this cave and with this bat species, bats are giving birth in the cave. Now in Wisconsin and the Midwest, it's a totally different thing. Our bats are, if they do use caves, are hibernating in the cave, and they are not giving birth and not spending summer months in the cave. They're only there in the wintertime. And that's really critical when it comes to understanding white nose syndrome. So when we think of bats around the world, yes, they're important for a variety of reasons. When we go to the grocery store, mangoes, avocados, figs, papayas, cashews, even chocolate are all products that in some ways are benefited by bats. Of course, bats are the primary pollinators of tequila, or excuse me, agave. So if you enjoy tequila margaritas, thank a bat. We wouldn't have tequila without them. And then bats, of course, belong to their own order. They are mammals. The order is Chiroptera, which means hand wing. So they do indeed have a thumb, and then four flexible fingers with a skin membrane stretched between those fingers. And really the proportions of the bat's body, the bat's body looks very similar to ours when we look at the skeletal structure, but the proportions are different. So those fingers are as long as the body. Your fingertips, if you had bat fingers, would drag on the ground. And then, of course, they also have a tail, often with a tail membrane to help them fly as well. And they're really great flyers. We like to kind of give the birders a hard time, those of us in the bat conservation world. So we always like to say that, bats are more agile in flight than birds, and they really need to be because they're hunting and grabbing insects with that hand wing. And they can reach high speeds, up to 60 miles an hour. Go to the next slide. There we go. So when we think of bats around the world, all are nocturnal. They all hang upside down. They've got a special tendon in their foot that allows their toes to grip so that they don't even need to think about that. Of course, they sleep hanging upside down. And if you're wondering if they ever do turn upright, it's for a couple of reasons. At the roost, they also have great little grippy thumbs. You can see the thumb at the top of the wing there in the thumbnail. But they will turn upright and cling with those thumbs to the wall or the ceiling when they need to urinate or defecate. You wouldn't want to do that the opposite way around. And then when the females are giving birth as well, and they'll catch that pup in the tail membrane. So some bats around the world use echolocation. It's not a given, not all of them do. And worldwide, of course, they have very diverse diets. And yeah, superpowers are those specially gripping toes. And the very, very loud echolocation calls, they've got a special flap in their ear that needs to close as they emit their call when they echolocate so that they don't deafen themselves. But as a group of animals, they are, many of them tend to be very small. They're very vulnerable to predation, particularly because they are nocturnal and they're resting during the daytime when it's bright daylight. So they like to hide. The species here on the left side of the screen are some tent-making bats found in the tropics. They'll crawl up under, the rib of a banana leaf. They'll even chew along the rib of the leaf to let it flop down. And then when you look up under the leaf, those white Honduran tent-making bats at the bottom will, sort of blend in with the sunlight filtering in through the green leaf, and they're almost invisible, hiding under the leaf. The disc-winged bat in the middle has little suction cups, kind of, Spider-Man-like. It can go straight up the side of the building, so that's its superpower, in this case, the side of a banana leaf. And then the bat on the right is using that pitcher plant to hide in. It's, perfect for just one bat. And then, of course, when the bat defecates, it feeds the plant. Bats have usually excellent camouflage, again, trying to hide from predators. And, of course, their camouflage often, matches their roost preferences. So on the left side of the screen is our native Wisconsin hoary bat. And the hoary bat is our largest bat. Its pelage is beautiful, blends right in with tree bark, but they also seem to look a lot like pine cones, and they're often found roosting in coniferous trees. The bat in the center is just the backside of an eastern red bat. You can even see its little toes gripping the oak leaves at the top of the fur mass that you see. It's got a little furred tail membrane there as well. And it's often found roosting in clusters of dried dead oak leaves in the summer months. And then the bat on the right, not a native species, but one of perhaps the best camouflage bats that we know of, the proboscis bat. So species diversity, when we look at bats worldwide, we just see all sorts of really unique ear shapes, but particularly nose and lip or mouth shapes. And many of those, nose leaves, we call them, and lips have to do, of course, with specialized echolocation for specialized bat diets and the habitat that the bat is hunting in. And we'll get more into that in a little while. Bats around the world, we talked about, of course, many of you are familiar with the fruit eaters and the pollinating species and their importance, but they have very diverse diets. So in addition to just insects and fruit and nectar, we've got, and here's an example of a long-tongued bat. Its special power or adaptation is that its tongue is 1.5 times its body length. So imagine, a house cat and putting the water dish maybe 3 feet away, and the cat would still be able to reach out with its tongue and drink the water. Here we've got bats that fish for their food. So there are bats that are, the predators of small mammals and birds and frogs and even other bats. But this fishing species, the bulldog bat, will actually gaff the fish out of the water with its toe claws. The species on the right is a species, again, in the tropics that needs to be extremely careful when it's hunting in a rainforest in the dark of night. You wouldn't want to eat just any frog that you find in the rainforest. So this is a bat that listens and can identify the frogs based on their call and hunts that way. And then this is the pallid bat of the desert Southwest, immune to the stings of scorpions and centipedes. And of course, a lot of people wonder about vampire bats, so we always like to mention those. We've got 3 species worldwide. They're really very adept at jumping and running and hopping. So this is a bat, these are sanguivores, blood feeders. They'll kind of creep up on a cow, a goat, a chicken. They're pretty host specific, but they'll sneak up and, kind of walk up to the animal on the ground and go up onto the animal's leg or land on its back. And with those 2 little sharp teeth on the top of their mouth, they make a little incision, and then they'll actually lap up the blood. They have an anticoagulant in their saliva that helps the blood flow, but they lap up about a teaspoon's worth of blood before they fly off again. And so the animal's unharmed. And this is my best bat joke. The cow does not turn into a vampire cow the next day. But we'll show you some video of a lab experiment, a study looking at social connections within these colonies. And the caged individual was not allowed to go feed for the night. And the bats outside the cage were allowed to go feed. And they're bringing a blood meal to the caged individual and regurgitating that blood for the bat in the cage, which is something, many of us would probably do for our friends. These individuals are unrelated. So that's the really unique thing about this group of animals. And they're even known to adopt orphaned pups, again, of unrelated individuals. And that's something, of course, quite unique in the animal world. All right. So around the Midwest and Wisconsin, bats, of course, everywhere are part of the food chain. Here in Wisconsin, predators are snakes sometimes, but more commonly owls, hawks, raccoons, and very commonly house cats. And it's something that we're really interested in and beginning to study in our state, particularly now that we have so many fewer bats at certain hibernation sites. And you're looking at a video here of Nita Mine, one of our largest hibernation sites, and bats are swarming around the mine entrance in the fall. They're circling, going in and out of the bat-friendly gate that you see there. And this is a cat that comes nearly every night and just waits, of course, to grab bats as they're sort of vulnerably in this narrow entrance area of the mine. And the bottom picture on the right is a raccoon waiting at that same mine gate. So bats exist everywhere in the world. They've been around about 50 million years. So of course, they're a really adaptable and very successful group of animals. We have over 1,400 known species worldwide, and they represent more than 20% of Earth's mammal diversity. 1 out of every 5 mammals or more is a bat species. So that's pretty fantastic. They fall generally into 2 groups. We have more microbats than megabats, but the megachiropterans are the large flying foxes and fruit bats of Africa, Asia, and Australia. Rob there is holding a Malayan flying fox. Some of you maybe came to see some of our bat festivals when they were in the Milwaukee area and got to see some of these species up close, but Camilla there has a nearly 6-foot wingspan. Brian on the left is holding a Wisconsin big brown bat. So big browns are microchiropterans. Most microchiropterans have, echolocation ability, and most are insectivorous. They tend to have very small eyes but bigger ears because they echolocate versus the megachiropterans, which have large eyes and smaller ears, and they often rely on their sense of sight and sense of smell to locate food. And when we think of bats as a group of animals, they are subject to easy decline and are really in need of protection. This is a photo of a cave in Tennessee, and this is a species called the gray bat, and they are known to cluster in these huge, huge numbers during hibernation. So there's obviously tens of thousands of bats just on this one wall, in this big cave system. And these bats have come in to just this one little area. And in the summertime, they're spreading out onto the landscape across farms, fields, forests, and neighborhoods to the tune of thousands of square miles. So at certain points in their annual cycle, they are extremely vulnerable. If the cave would, collapse, if there was human disturbance or vandalism, if the cave flooded, these bats are subject to dramatic losses very quickly. And they're very reliant on these critical habitats. So even if you think about, bats coming into someone's attic or a bat house, they're gathering, but if something happens to that bat house, if it falls off the post, falls off the wall while the pups are in it, a large number of bats can quickly be taken out. So it's something to consider as you put up bat houses. Make sure you're considering the maintenance and longevity of those bat houses and keeping them in good repair and checking on them each year. Bats are long-lived, of course, for their size. We've got not a world record, one of the near species records right here in Wisconsin. We have a bat that lived, a little brown male that lived to be at least 32 years old, according to banding records. And I believe the longest lived little brown bat is a Canadian little brown that lived to be 34 years old. And typically bats only have one pup per female per year. So if the population does crash, it can be very slow to recover. So bats, are an urban wildlife species, and it makes them, just fantastic to be able to watch. And of course, sometimes there's bat-human interactions that we occasionally have to be concerned about, and we spend a lot of time educating people on those bat encounters. This is a picture of the Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, Texas. And if you're interested in some bat tourism, Texas is a good place to go to view huge numbers of bats. You can go to Austin and see this emergence of, again, Mexican free-tailed bats. You can visit Bracken Cave. It's owned by Bat Conservation International. But there's about 3 million Mexican free-taileds underneath the bridge here. And when Austin first realized this, they were planning to get rid of the bat colony, fill in all the gaps where the bats were roosting under the bridge, and really considered it a problem. Bat Conservation International got involved, and Milwaukee area Merlin Tuttle, who started with the Milwaukee Public Museum, got involved and really changed hearts and minds in that city. And the city has since, of course, embraced their huge bat colony, and they have bat festivals. And when you go there, it's kind of a party atmosphere on the bridge at night. There's hundreds of people that gather. There's people selling like cotton candy and balloons. There's boat tours to view the emergence down on the river. So it's really fantastic. And our neighborhood bats, our backyard bats in Wisconsin are all insectivorous. They are the primary predator of our night-flying insects, and they are hungry. So a single little brown bat can eat up to 1,000 mosquito-sized insects per hour when she's out foraging at night. She'll eat up to her body weight if she's a lactating and nursing female, a mom. And generally speaking, our Wisconsin bats fall into two groups, and we'll get into those in a moment. But one more note about just the value of our Wisconsin bats. They're not just eating mosquitoes. What I want people to really take away is that bats are eating a wide range of insects, and that includes forestry and agricultural pests. In Wisconsin, they're eating corn borer, cutworm moth, potato beetle, grasshoppers, actually up to 29, I believe, different types of ag pests. And that's saving our farmers, millions to over $1 billion annually in pesticide costs. So here in Wisconsin, we've got 8 different bat species. There's about 50 bats in North America. So 8 of those are in Wisconsin, and they roughly fall into 2 groups. The tree bats on the right are and again, that's a eastern red bat with its furred tail membrane wrapped around it. They are migratory. And so you'll see these species, leave the state in the wintertime. We don't detect them acoustically in the wintertime. And on the left side of the screen, the cave bats that are listed will, of course, seek refuge underground in places where they can remain undisturbed, where the temperature is cool and humid but buffered. And they are the only bats that we typically find in caves and cave-like areas, so mines and tunnels in Wisconsin. And those are big brown bats in the photograph. So just to start with the cave bats, and I'm going to actually just direct your attention first to the little brown and big brown bat. Little browns and big browns are the two most common species that we have in our state, and indeed they used to be the most common species in North America. All of these cave bat species are affected by white nose syndrome, so things have changed a bit, in the last decade. But if you've ever had a bat encounter, if you've got a bat story, and many people do, and I hear about many of them, it was very, very likely a big brown bat, the bat in the center of the screen. Big browns are very cold, hardy, and they can tolerate a wide range of very dry, cold conditions. And so they are the bat that will overwinter in homes and buildings. And particularly Milwaukee, in the Milwaukee area is full of old buildings. And so we get lots of calls and bats coming out of homes and into living spaces in these winter months. And those are always big brown bats. The little brown bat on the right, also a home dwelling species, but we only see them using attics and eaves and behind shutters and things, roosting in the summer months. Big browns will also roost in the summer months in homes and attics, but they would prefer barns actually, and we have fewer of them typically roosting in the summertime. So both species that you may encounter around the house or in a human dwelling. I'm a bat biologist, and when I'm outside at night and I see these bats and they're flying in the dark, which is what they're doing, most of the time when they're active, we can't see them just like you can't. We can't hear them because they're calling above the range of human hearing. And that's where acoustics comes in to help us identify these species in flight and up on the landscape. So I'll play the call of the little brown and you can just hear the difference, and hopefully this will work, and somebody can chime in if you're not.
I'm not hearing anything right now. When you shared your screen, did you hit the button that allows you to
Let's go
do
back for 1
audio?
second. I realized we should have tested that, and I apologize we didn't.
This is fascinating.
I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second and try
Okay.
to go back in and make sure that we can hear. Here we go, share sound. Okay. Okay, let's try this again. You can tell me if you can hear it.
Yep, we can hear it. And for the record, I just helped with an IT issue.
Thank you, Tim. So little brown bats, you're hearing like that very fast clicky call, and I'm going to have you listen to this one more time, and this time I'm going to ask you to listen for something specific. When the bat is out, searching and hunting for its prey, it's sending out these regular pulses of sound, but when it does encounter and sort of see with its sound the prey in the distance, it sends out more rapid calls, and you'll hear that as a zipper noise. It's called a feeding buzz, and there's two of them in this call, so listen for the two feeding buzzes. Okay. So we like to say we get excited when we hear those, if we're out doing a bat acoustic survey, because it means maybe a mosquito just got killed. And that's good for us. Big brown bats are a lower frequency calling bat. They are hunting instead of small-bodied insects like little brown bats, who are using a higher frequency call. Big browns are hunting large-bodied insects like June bugs and some moths, and they'll hunt in open areas compared to little browns, maybe more along the forest edge and in more cluttered foraging habitats. And so the big brown is going to use a low frequency sound that can travel a little bit further. As the echo bounces back to their ears, the feedback isn't maybe quite as precise, but they don't necessarily need that because they're hunting this larger bodied insect that's moving more slowly. So here we go with the big brown. Okay. And then tricolored bat, I apologize, I don't have a call for it, but that's our smallest bat, cave hibernating bat. This bat is wearing a band. And the northern long-eared bat is very, very similar to the little brown bat. When we're in the field and have a bat in hand, we're looking at the tragus, that flap of skin in the ear. And with the northern long-eared, it's very spear-shaped and symmetrical and pointed compared to the little brown bat's tragus. Tricolored bats and northern long-eared bats are far less common on the landscape, even before white nose syndrome. Now there's very few, very, very few indeed. I think it was 3 years ago, we encountered 2 northern long-eared bats statewide during winter hibernation surveys. And luckily last year, I think we had about 10. So we think we might be seeing a little bit of an uptick, but we haven't completed this year's surveys yet. So there are very, very few out there. The tree bats. Now, in general, when we look at this group of bats and you sit back and look at the pelage, they're more colorful. And so we've got, again, bats that are needing to blend in with foliage. They're tree roosting during the summer months, and then they're leaving the state for warmer areas to overwinter. So again, I'll play these calls for you. We'll start with the eastern red. And then the silver-haired bat sounds very similar. And then the hoary bat, again, looking like a pine cone in the coniferous tree here. This is, again, our largest bodied bat, and so they're hunting really large bodied insects, luna moths and large beetles. And so they're our lowest frequency calling bat. And if you've got a bat detector, and maybe if you're younger and haven't been to too many rock concerts and things like that, you can sometimes train yourself to hear a hoary bat. Where you're looking at the sonogram appear on the screen of the bat detector, and you can turn the volume off, and you can sometimes sense this very high-pitched, almost like a mosquito whine or a ringing in your ears, but it's pulsing when you're in the presence of a hoary, and you can sort of train your ear to detect them. So here's the hoary. All right. Hopefully that call brings some smiles. We always like to hear that one. And I should mention too, the reason we're able to hear these calls is, of course, they've been recorded, but then the frequency has been divided down to a level that our ears can hear. So I'm conscious of the time, and I'm going to kind of fly through how we study bats in Wisconsin. We'll start with the annual cycle. We go where the bats are, if we want to encounter them and learn about them. So in the springtime is emergence. Right now, bats are hibernating, and we'll ignore that for the moment. But come mid-May, bats have come up onto the landscape or returned to the state if they're a migratory species, a tree bat. And that's when the female actually gets pregnant. We'll go back to that in a moment. She gets pregnant. She gives birth around June 1st at her roost, which again is going to be perhaps a bat house if it's a little brown bat or a big brown bat, maybe an attic or a barn. But for all of the other species, it's probably going to be a tree or a tree-like structure. And then that pup needs about 5 or 6 weeks to get big enough and filled out enough to learn to fly before it's going to leave the roost. So around July 15th, we get a lot of calls from people finding bats, in odd places. That's the pups oftentimes learning to fly and get out on the landscape. So July 15th, everybody's flying. For the remainder of summer, everyone's out at night foraging and trying to really pack on the grams because bats want to put on about 30% of their body weight, 20 to 30%, just in the last months of summer, August, September. to prepare for hibernation. And by mid-August, they are already going back to cave and mine entrance areas where they're going to do that swarming activity that we saw the video of with the cat. And they're going to go at night and go in and out of the cave or mine entrance with other bats. And that goes on nightly for many weeks in September. And by early October, bats have really entered the site and gone into torpor. So long-term torpor, hibernation. Every 2 weeks or so, the bat will wake up during hibernation, but then right away they're going to go back into hibernation and try to conserve their fat reserves. You can see hibernation lasts 6 to 7 months of the year. So that's a huge amount of time that bats are not able to access their insect food diet. And mating occurs at the beginning of hibernation during the fall swarm period with that nightly swarming at mine entrances. It will occasionally occur throughout the winter, but the female retains the sperm and doesn't actually ovulate, and the egg doesn't get fertilized until she emerges in the spring. And it's a really amazing survival strategy. Bats are able to then, after losing a third of their body weight in hibernation, they're able to come up onto the landscape. They don't have to waste time looking for a mate. She can go right off and have her baby. I should mention too, the females gather in maternity colonies in large numbers if they're little browns or big browns. And the males are often solitary out on the landscape in the summertime. So in the summer, we've talked about bat houses, barns, under the bark of trees or in the crevices of trees are where bats like to roost. We create as humans a lot of, structures that provide really nice, warm, dry, cozy conditions. And that's what the bats are looking for, particularly when it comes to maternity colonies. And then, of course, the number one thing is that they want to stay hidden from predators while they're day roosting. Now, we think of, bat houses as being good places to see bats. And you can see bats emerge from their summer roost, a bat house or a barn or an attic. But at nighttime, when they do emerge, they leave the area right away. And so I'm showing you a video that doesn't take place at night. Instead, it takes place in the morning, about an hour before sunrise. And this is a group of bat houses at Stonefield Village Historic Site along the Mississippi River near Cassville, Wisconsin. And these little brown bats have been out foraging all night. Then they're coming back and preparing to enter the bat houses for the day, to sleep the day away. We don't know why they do this. It's one of the many mysteries of bats. And, it's very likely that it's social. They're perhaps, deciding who's going to get to go up in the roost first. But this is a beautiful thing to watch. And right as the sun, begins to light up the sky, the bats sort of, this swarm sort of ebbs, and the bats one by one are sort of mysteriously disappearing until there's no bats left flying around the bat houses. They've all crawled up inside. We do conduct emergence counts. So at night, 30 minutes after sunset, the bats exit the roost, a bat house or a barn or an attic or wherever they're roosting. It's kind of like clockwork. And if you're somebody who has issues with bats in your home and you want to know where they're accessing the home, this is the time to watch, 30 minutes after sunset in the summer months. And we have volunteers, of course, that do a lot of citizen-based monitoring, doing roost counts for us statewide. And if you count in June, it's just the moms coming out. Count again at the end of July. Now you've got pups flying as well. So if each mom has one pup, you should see your roost numbers double approximately by the end of summer. So we've got about 500 roosts that people monitor statewide. Most of these are privately owned, people's homes and bat houses. And we are really super grateful for all the people who volunteer their, mosquito swatting hours at dusk to count bats for us. It doesn't take long. It's fun to do. And we get wonderful data from these folks. In the summertime, because bats are out at night, we're doing our field work at night. Here we're capturing some bats. Each bat goes in a little bag, and then it's getting weighed and measured and tagged. Another way to monitor, and I should mention the roosts are good places for us to go. We know we can, reliably catch bats that way. Mist netting is the other way that we might catch bats on the landscape. Acoustic monitoring. And here's a picture of Urban Ecology Center folks out monitoring with bat detectors. The bats sending out these regular pulses of sound. Each species, as we heard, produces a unique sound. And so that translates into a sonogram or picture of sound that can be identified down to species level. We usually have software programs that do this with some manual vetting. And statewide, we have many volunteers that run acoustic survey routes. Some have been run, of course, around the Milwaukee area, Menominee River, and park walks and things by Urban Ecology Center and others. But here's just one example where somebody got in their canoe with a detector. This is up in Vilas County, and we're going to return to this lake as we finish the program. But they paddled around the lake shore. The green dots that you see are little brown bats or acoustic calls that were encountered. And so we can't count individual bats, but we can get a sense of relative abundance and also species diversity. So the blue dots are hoary bats, the yellow dots are big brown bats, the gray dots are silver-haired bats on this survey map. We've got about 350 lake and river routes statewide that we've run, and volunteers or staff continue to survey statewide. And the reason that we've done this is to try to get a sense of who's out there on the landscape, and in what parts of the state. So here's our example, tricolored bat. We know white nose is coming. We know this species is heavily impacted by the disease. Where are they? So here's the white dots, all of our lake and river routes that we've surveyed acoustically across the state. But if we look at just the surveys where we encountered the tricolored bat, or eastern pipistrelle is another name for it, we can see that, in the summer months, that tricolored bat is really only in the southwest part of the state, and we do not encounter them in other areas. So if we want to know where we need to focus our summertime conservation efforts for tricoloreds, it's this part of the state. So I mentioned mist netting. That's another way to get bats out of the air. If we've got a concentrated stream of bats or area where bats are flying, we can use a harp trap. It's like a harp where there's vertical lines and the bats bump into those little fishing strings or fishing lines, and they kind of fall down into the bag at the bottom of the harp. We weigh and measure to process bats, sometimes take samples, fur or skin, or swab the skin. We do band and pit tag bats regularly now on the landscape, both in the summer and definitely in the winter. Pit tagging has really been a wonderful technique to begin to learn how bats are using our landscape. And here, Edgar, our technician, is scanning the outside of a bat condo at Peninsula State Park to scan for those tags. Pit tags are the same little tags that go in your cat or dog under their skin. And then radio telemetry, when you think about a collared wolf or polar bear and like National Geographic shows or something tracking these animals across a huge landscape, bats are a little different. They're so tiny, they really can't carry much weight at all. So the battery that we can put on the radio transmitter is very tiny. It only lasts about 6 days or 7 days. But we can release a bat with a transmitter and she can take us right to, whatever type of preferred forest habitat that, in this case, a northern long-eared bat is roosting in. In the winter, bats are underground. We've got about 200 hibernation sites scattered across Wisconsin. About 60% are caves. The rest are mines and mine-like, underground structures, so tunnels. The largest numbers of bats that we have are in just 3 sites, however. 99% of our little brown bats are in Nita Mine, Maiden Rock Mine, and Bay City. And Maiden Rock and Bay City are in Pierce County, up near the Twin Cities. Nita Mine is in Dodge County, not far from Horicon. And in the wintertime, we go underground and physically enter these sites to physically, count the bats and also identify species. Not all Wisconsin caves or mines are large. A lot of the sites have really constricted entrances or collapses that we're negotiating to get inside. We do some vertical rope work. We're even sometimes paddling around in flooded mines, in kayaks and canoes. And most of our underground sites in Wisconsin are very small and muddy and wet, and they aren't necessarily pleasant places to access. But when we are surveying, we're physically counting. We're usually also involved in research. And most of that research, of course, has to do with white nose syndrome because it's a disease of hibernation. And so we'll quickly cover that. Lots of threats to bats worldwide and close to home, but white nose syndrome is by far the thing we're most concerned about. And just the quick background again, white nose syndrome is a fungal disease. When the bats hibernate, they grow a white fungus in their skin tissue, not just on their skin, but in their skin. And that leads them to wake up every 3 or 4 days from hibernation. So very quickly they burn through their fat reserves. We see them emerge on the landscape and die of exposure if they don't die of the disease itself inside the cave. Now, most of those deaths occurred just in the first 3 to 4 years of the disease arriving at any given hibernation site. So we've passed the point of the mass die-offs. But just to help you understand the disease, it's only affecting hibernating bats that are using cool cave environments. So when the bat hibernates, it cools its body down to conserve energy. The fungal pathogen, Pseudogymnoascus destructans, or PD for short, is a cold-loving fungus. When it's cultured, you have to grow it in a refrigerator and not, in a warm environment. So this fungus stays in the cave environment even when the bats aren't there. The environment is contaminated with fungus in the sediment. So when we first saw this disease arrive in Wisconsin, here's actually our ground zero site in Grant County. It's a mine that usually held about 1,000 on average little brown bats. White nose arrives over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. We see the population, completely decimated. And this is a site that really we haven't experienced recovery. We've got, bats that I can count now on my fingers, not 1,000, but single digits most years, that have sort of stabilized with just a tiny handful at this site. And this is where the disease is nationwide. It started in New York State at a single cave and very rapidly spread from there. That was in 2007 or so, 2008. And by 2014, it had reached Wisconsin. And then shortly after that, a few years later, it actually jumped to the West Coast. And so we have looked nationally and as a group, at many, many ways to prevent this disease. And we could talk for a very long time just on white nose syndrome and treatment strategies. What you should know is that we are now 11 years post white nose syndrome in Wisconsin, and bats are still stressed by white nose syndrome each winter when they hibernate, but the ones that are still here are surviving and coexisting with the disease. So if you look at this bat's wing, this is from last winter. This is a typical little brown bat in a hibernation site in Wisconsin, and all those little orange dots are the fungal infection fluorescing under ultraviolet light. It's one of the ways we can look for signs of the disease. So this bat is infected, but when you look at the bat, it appears relatively healthy otherwise, and it ends up surviving the winter with decent body condition. We did lose most of our little brown bats during the first several years after the arrival of white nose, but in just the last few winters, we've seen increases of over 50% of our bats again at our largest hibernation sites. We had originally gone down to just 20% of the population at the largest sites. And as I said, 99% of our little brown bats are in those 3 sites. So we're very, I think, fortunate to have kind of dodged a bullet in Wisconsin. And we're seeing a similar return with summer roosts on the summer landscape where populations are really increasing, particularly at sites along the Wisconsin and Mississippi rivers. And those increases are just, as I said, occurring in the last 2 to 3 years. And so we're just getting a handle now on what's going to happen. But here's just a couple of graphs to show you a little bit of that population increase at our biggest mine sites, where we bottomed out with about 20% of the population, and now we're seeing an upward trajectory again. So it's really heartening for us as biologists who have watched, the wave of die-offs come through. This is Carlin Lake, that lake in Vilas County. So here's what its white nose syndrome is doing on the landscape. Remember the first acoustic survey you saw, the lake was covered in bat activity, but then right after white nose arrives, we see this huge, die-off where bats do not return to the summertime landscape. We've got that lone big brown bat, the yellow dot in the survey on the left. But then a few years later, we've got a handful of individuals returning. Again, not a lot of little brown bats. The green dots are the little browns, and they've mostly disappeared still. And when we look at acoustically Wisconsin, our most common bat in green over there on the left used to be little browns. The red is eastern red, the brown is big brown, and the blue is the hoary bat. And so as you look, Wisconsin has changed the summer landscape. We've gone from mostly little browns to, the number 1 bat that we see flying out there is the big brown bat. Hasn't really changed much for you guys in Milwaukee, though. It was always eastern red bats and big browns that were very common in Milwaukee, and that continues to be the case. So we've had some silver linings with the migratory species, the tree bats, not being affected by white nose, and big browns are doing okay. We've had a lot of public awareness and then lots of volunteering, even Urban Ecology Center folks knowing this was coming, really taking up the mantle of getting our baseline data, on Wisconsin bats before the disease arrived. And I'll mention again, pit tags are really amazing. We are starting to have pit tag readers at our most significant summer sites and winter sites. So the map shows summer roost sites in the diamonds, the yellow diamonds, and the large hibernation sites are the big black dots. And we're starting to see bat movement between summer and winter habitat. And that was something we really had no data on, or very, very little before pit tag systems. So very quickly, as we kind of wrap up and come to the top of the hour, for those of you that do need to take off, if you're visiting caves, still be aware of white nose syndrome. Don't move gear significant distances. If you've had it in a cave, you can transport the fungus, and don't disturb bats during hibernation. Perform humane exclusions from buildings. You can read all about this on our website. Just search bats from the DNR website, and we've got a whole packet about how to get bats out humanely. Be aware that bats might be roosting before you cut down a dead tree, for example, or take down an old building, or do a roof repair. You can look for guano on the building or bat poop, and you can also watch 30 minutes after sunset in the summer to see if bats emerge. Put up bat houses. Again, we've got guidance on the DNR website, so visit the DNR website and search bats or bat house. And then plant native and eradicate or control invasive species. Our native bats need native insect diets, and so we can support our native insects with native plantings and other landscape habitat improvements and restorations. But if you've got burdock growing on property, it's not as much of an issue in an urban area, but it can snag bats and of course songbirds as well. So be aware of sharp edges around bat emergence points and also burdock. I mentioned controlling invasives, but just general wildlife care tips in your landscape are what's going to benefit bats. Learn and share information. Obviously, sometimes people still have negative misconceptions about bats, and so you can sometimes change some hearts and minds with just some good information sharing. We've got a couple of places to donate to bat conservation work in Wisconsin. And with that, I know we're at the top of the hour, and I don't know if Zoom is going to kick us out. Tim, you'll be able to.
No, we control this